The story of Samuel "Sammy" Luna begins long before federal agents placed restraints around his wrists, long before prosecutors recited his name in courtrooms, and long before a judge sentenced him to 14 and a half years in federal prison. His rise unfolded in the shadowed corridors of California's correctional system, where power is reclaimed not through legislation or public decree, but through fear, loyalty, and violence. To understand Luna's eventual downfall, you first must understand the world that shaped him. A world where the Nuestra Familia prison gang emerged as one of the most sophisticated and feared criminal organizations on the West Coast. Behind the razor wire and cold concrete walls, the Nuestra Familia was not born from chaos. It was born from purpose. What began in the 1960s as a revolutionary-type movement to protect northern Hispanic inmates from rival gangs evolved into a militarized and disciplined criminal empire. The gang structure mirrored that of a paramilitary organization with rank, strategy, and a strict code of conduct. For thousands of Northern California youths drawn into the orbit of the Norteño street subculture, their destinies often intersected with the influence of the NF, willingly or otherwise. This is where Sammy Luna's story begins, caught between poverty, identity, and the promise of belonging. Luna's early years were shaped by the same socioeconomic forces that have pulled so many young men toward gang life. Neighborhood divisions, generational membership, and the ever-present Norteño-Sureño conflict shaped street-level existence. To grow up in these environments was to grow up under constant tension, and for many, that tension hardened into identity. Luna, like many before him, was swept into this current. Whether it started on the street or behind bars, the path toward the NF rarely begins with ambition. It begins with survival. The first time Luna stepped into a jail pod, he would have understood something essential. Incarceration is not a pause in gang life. It is a continuation of it. Inside, the NF's influence was unmistakable. The organization had rules, systems, expectations. Even the newest faces learned quickly that power in prison was not random. It was structured, enforced by men who operated with a clarity of purpose. In that world, Luna found a space where discipline elevated one's position far more than youthful bravado. As Luna grew within the Norteño street framework, he became known as someone who followed orders, understood communication, and respected the organization's hierarchy. Those qualities made him valuable. Men inside the system watch closely. They watch who listens, who carries out tasks, who maintains composure under pressure. The NF, unlike many prison-born organizations, rewards stability and intelligence as much as violence. Over time, Luna demonstrated both. From the county jails to the sprawling network of California state prisons, Luna's identity evolved. He was no longer simply a Norteño gang member. He became something more, a trusted facilitator, a conduit for decision-making, a man whose loyalty and discipline were recognized by those already high within the ranks. His responsibilities expanded. He began coordinating communications between incarcerated leaders and outside regiments on the streets, helping maintain the gang's financial lifelines through taxation, drug distribution, and extortion operations. What he learned during this period was invaluable. The NF was a machine, and every message, every order, every dollar collected contributed to its momentum. Inside the NF, elevation is never casual. Those who climb do so with intention, and those who are permitted to rise are screened carefully. Over time, Luna proved he possessed the traits leadership valued: reliability, strategic thinking, and the willingness to enforce discipline when required. Enforcement within the NF is not symbolic. It is brutal, final, and often deadly. Whether Luna wielded the blade himself or simply helped ensure loyalty remained intact, his involvement deepened his place within the organization's inner structure. As the years progressed, Luna became intertwined with the NF's most powerful circle, the General Council. This council, made up of top-ranking leaders, functioned as the governing body of the entire criminal syndicate. Its decision-making reached far beyond prison walls, influencing the actions of hundreds of street-level members, drug traffickers, and enforcers. To enter this circle was to ascend into the highest tier of prison gang authority, one step below the organization's supreme leadership. It was a position reached by only a handful of men. But even as Luna rose within the organization, the world outside was changing. Law enforcement agencies, long frustrated by the NF's ability to control operations from maximum security cells, launched multi-jurisdictional investigations aimed at decapitating the leadership structure. Wiretaps, undercover sources, cooperating witnesses, and intelligence gathered from years of surveillance were slowly tightening around Luna and his associates. Yet inside the prison walls, insulated by authority and surrounded by loyalists, Luna's ascent seemed unshakable. What makes the story of Sammy Luna so compelling is that his rise unfolded at the same time federal authorities were preparing the most ambitious crackdown on the Nuestra Familia in a decade. As Luna's power grew, so did the size of the case being built against him. His ascent and his downfall were not separate stories. They were intertwined, moving toward collision. By the time Luna reached the General Council, directing regiments and signing off on violent orders, a silent countdown had already begun. Agents were listening, prosecutors were preparing, and every conversation, every directive, every coded message was bringing Luna one step closer to indictment. This is the world Luna rose through, a world built on structure, secrecy, and blood. And it is the world that federal authorities were preparing to strike with precision. But before that strike came, Luna would solidify his place at the top of one of America's most influential prison gangs. Inside the world of California's most formidable prison gangs, power does not flow chaotically. It flows deliberately, through channels built over decades, refined through bloodshed, secrecy, and discipline. For the Nuestra Familia, that channel was the General Council, a ruling body of high-ranking members whose authority stretched across penitentiaries, state prisons, and entire regions of the outside world. By the time Sammy Luna secured his place within this elite command structure, he had entered a level of influence that few ever reached. And from that position, he helped direct an organization built on precision. The General Council was more than a group of leaders. It was the brain of the Nuestra Familia. Its directives shaped the gang's alliances, disputes, economic strategies, and internal order. Only a handful of individuals were entrusted with a seat at this table, and each one carried responsibilities that reached far beyond personal reputation. For Luna, joining the General Council meant taking on the burden of guiding an organization that operated like a government within a government. Every member of the NF, from the men on tier yards to the foot soldiers on the streets, was affected by decisions made inside tiny concrete cells where council members were held. Luna's role within the council required discipline, intelligence, and a calculated approach to leadership. Messages had to be crafted with care. Orders had to be delivered in ways that protected the chain of command. The methods of communication ranged from coded letters and clandestine phone calls to messages smuggled through visitors or corrupt intermediaries. In the era of widespread cell phone smuggling, many leaders relied on illicit devices to maintain tighter control. But those phones also carried risk that federal investigators were learning to exploit. Still, Luna held fast to the organization's strategy. The General Council worked to maintain regiments throughout cities and counties, each headed by regiment commanders responsible for generating income, enforcing discipline, and carrying out missions. These street regiments funneled proceeds from drug trafficking and extortion back into the prison system, ensuring leaders remained financially supported and organizational efforts continued. Luna, like the other council members, oversaw these regiments, monitored their productivity, and authorized punitive measures when expectations were not met. Violence was a fundamental tool of governance. The council believed that the threat of death kept the organization stable. Those who violated rules, withheld taxes, or showed signs of disloyalty were subject to discipline, which could include assault or execution. Luna's position granted him access to discussions regarding corrective action, decisions that often determined whether someone lived or died. The murder conspiracies, later identified by federal prosecutors, trace back to these moments of council deliberation, where Luna and others weighed the intelligence they received and issued approval for violent missions. In the eyes of investigators, Luna was not a passive participant. He was a contributing decision-maker. But despite its seemingly impenetrable structure, the General Council faced constant internal pressure. Leadership shifts, incarceration locations, and communication disruptions could threaten stability. Council members had to maintain unity even as new arrests, transfers, and accusations created fractures within the organization. For Luna, the challenge was balancing loyalty to tradition with the realities of a gang evolving under intense surveillance. By the late 2010s and early 2020s, the NF was experiencing both expansion and strain. Street-level operations were profitable, driven by drug markets and extortion schemes that brought in substantial revenue. Yet, internally, the gang faced disputes over leadership authority, the integrity of regiments, and rising tensions between older and younger generations. To maintain order, the council doubled down on discipline. This environment led to the series of murder and attempted murder conspiracies prosecutors would later cite to demonstrate the organization's violent nature and Luna's role in it. In Luna's world, decision-making required caution. Any misstep, any miscommunication, any sign of hesitation could undermine the gang's authority or provoke internal conflict. Luna had risen high, but leadership came with risk. Federal agents were watching, and every violent order carried with it the potential for fatal legal consequences. Still, within the concrete constraints of the prison system, Luna believed he was operating with precision. For years, the council functioned under a cloak of secrecy, strong enough to shield them from major prosecution. But what Luna did not fully grasp was the extent to which investigators had embedded themselves into the NF's communication pipeline. Every coded message was a puzzle federal agents worked to decode. Every intercepted phone call was a thread in a larger conspiracy. Slowly, investigators assembled a picture of the council's influence, its economic reach, its internal enforcement systems, and its approval of violent missions. Luna, by virtue of his position, became a central figure in that picture. As the council made decisions, some about discipline, others about expansion, it unknowingly fed evidence into an increasingly large federal case. Luna's influence, once a source of power, was becoming a trail for prosecutors to follow. And although the council believed secrecy protected them, the walls around them were tightening. By early 2021, the federal government was ready to strike. The indictments would soon come down, targeting the heart of the General Council and the men who directed the Nuestra Familia from the shadows. Luna, confident in his authority, could not yet see the storm gathering just beyond the prison gates. The crackdown that would ultimately bring Sammy Luna to federal court did not happen overnight. It was the product of years of surveillance, months of coordinated planning, and countless hours spent tracing the lines of communication that bound the Nuestra Familia together. By the time investigators and prosecutors were ready to move, they understood something crucial. To dismantle the organization's leadership, they could not simply target its soldiers. They had to strike at the command structure itself, at the General Council, at the individuals whose decisions shaped the gang's violent reach. Luna's name was already in their files, circled, highlighted, and underlined. The investigation that led to the 2021 federal indictment began as many long-term gang cases do, with fragments. A smuggled cell phone confiscated from a prison tier, a coded letter intercepted in the mailroom, a confidential informant who agreed to share details in exchange for leniency. Alone, each piece of intelligence revealed very little, but together they formed a mosaic that exposed the inner workings of the NF's leadership. Investigators from the FBI, ATF, DEA, and multiple state agencies worked in tandem, sharing information, comparing patterns, and watching for inconsistencies in the gang's communication system. What investigators discovered was that the General Council, thought to be insulated by secrecy, had vulnerabilities. Some messages were intercepted before reaching their intended audience. Others, believed to be secure, were deciphered with the help of former gang members who understood the codes and patterns in NF communication. And within this web of intelligence, the name Sammy Luna appeared repeatedly, tied to directives, to regiments, and eventually to acts of violence. By late 2020, federal agents had gathered enough evidence to propose a sweeping racketeering indictment aimed not at the low-level operatives but at the NF's ruling class. The indictment targeted Luna and several other high-ranking members who prosecutors alleged were responsible for authorizing murders, directing drug trafficking enterprises, and overseeing extortion operations across multiple counties. It was one of the most significant moves against the gang in years, designed not to disrupt the organization temporarily, but to fracture its leadership in a lasting way. One of the most devastating elements of the case came from the murder conspiracies investigators linked to Luna. According to the evidence later presented in court, the council had approved multiple violent missions over a period of years, some involving internal discipline, others involving retaliation or enforcement against rivals. Prosecutors identified 4 murder conspiracies connected to the council's directives, and Luna's involvement in the approval process became a key piece of the government's narrative. Alongside these, investigators also tied him to an attempted murder plot, further strengthening the argument that he was instrumental in maintaining the gang's violent governance. The indictment, unsealed in 2021, sent shockwaves through the Nuestra Familia network. Across state prisons and federal facilities, word spread quickly. The top tier had been targeted. Phone calls were monitored. Regiments scrambled to determine which lines of communication were compromised. Some members feared internal betrayal. Others believed the federal government had been watching for years without their knowledge. Regardless of the speculation, the impact was undeniable. The indictment struck directly at the leadership structure that had maintained the organization's stability. For Luna, the moment the indictment was revealed marked a shift from secretive influence to public scrutiny. His name was listed among those accused of participating in a racketeering conspiracy that stretched far beyond any one prison yard. Prosecutors painted him as a decision-maker, a man whose approval helped greenlight violent actions that kept the NF in power. The narrative was clear. Luna was not just present. He was active, involved, and essential to the organization's functioning. Federal agents conducted coordinated arrest operations, transferring already incarcerated council members into federal custody to face new charges. The case was vast, involving wiretaps, surveillance logs, seized correspondence, and testimony from witnesses who once served the gang faithfully. The government's aim was unmistakable. They sought not only to prosecute individuals, but to choke the operational capacity of the entire organization. As Luna awaited trial, he found himself in a different world, a world where the power and influence he once wielded behind bars offered no protection. No regiment could rescue him from federal charges. No coded communication could undo the years of surveillance, and no position within the gang could shield him from the reality that prosecutors had built one of the most detailed cases against the NF leadership in recent memory. Inside detention centers, Luna was forced to confront the power of a government determined to break the organization he helped lead. For years, the council had operated under the belief that their system of secrecy and discipline made them untouchable. The 2021 indictment proved otherwise. It revealed a federal government willing to devote immense resources to dismantling the power structure Luna was part of. The stage was now set for his prosecution, a legal battle that would strip away the layers of secrecy surrounding the general counsel and expose the violence, decisions, and conspiracies that had kept the NF alive for decades. Luna's influence had carried him to the highest ranks of the organization. But now, that same influence would form the foundation of the case against him. When the case against Sammy Luna finally entered the courtroom, it marked the beginning of a chapter that would expose the inner machinery of the Nuestra Familia in ways the public had rarely seen. For years, Luna and the general counsel operated behind layers of secrecy, insulated by coded messages, underground networks, and the protective infrastructure of prison culture. But in federal court, that world was stripped bare. Every intercepted call, every informant's account, every violent directive tied to the gang's leadership was laid out for a jury to consider. The courtroom became an arena, and Luna, once a commander of men, stood as a defendant facing the full weight of federal prosecution. The government opened its case with a clear narrative. Luna was not a passive member of the NF. He was part of the small ruling class that directed the gang's most consequential decisions. Prosecutors described the general counsel as a governing entity whose members held the power to order murders, authorize brutal discipline, and manage criminal enterprises across counties and correctional facilities. And standing among those leaders, they argued, was Sammy Luna, calm, deliberate, and integral to the organization's function. Prosecutors presented years of evidence, much of it gathered through painstaking surveillance. Federal agents testified about the methods used to intercept communications, revealing how coded language embedded in casual-sounding conversations masked orders for violence. Photographs of seized notes, transcriptions of smuggled phone calls, and diagrams of NF regiments demonstrated the structure that linked Luna to decisions made behind bars. Witnesses, some former gang members who had turned informants, detailed the rigid hierarchy of the NF and explained how Luna participated in discussions that shaped the organization's violent activity. The most damning part of the government's case centered on the murder conspiracies. Prosecutors outlined 4 separate murder plots tied directly to directives issued by the general counsel. Each conspiracy involved different targets and motivations. Some intended to silence perceived traitors, others meant to reinforce discipline or settle disputes within criminal markets. Although Luna was not accused of physically committing the acts, prosecutors argued that his involvement in approving these missions placed him at the center of the gang's violent machinery. To the government, authorization was as significant as action. By endorsing or supporting the orders, Luna, they argued, bore responsibility for the violence that resulted. The attempted murder conspiracy added further gravity to the case. Prosecutors described it as an instance where the gang sought to eliminate an individual believed to be a threat to organizational stability. Once again, they pointed to Luna's involvement in council deliberations that preceded the order. Together, these special findings exposed Luna to a significantly harsher sentence under the federal guidelines. The defense, however, attempted to challenge the prosecution's narrative. Luna's attorneys argued that the government's case relied heavily on informants with questionable credibility, men who, they suggested, were willing to say anything to reduce their own sentences. They portrayed Luna as a man swept up by association, someone whose proximity to powerful figures made him an easy target in a broad indictment. They challenged the interpretation of coded messages and suggested that prosecutors were imposing meaning where none existed. Throughout the trial, Luna remained calm, composed, and quiet, observing the proceedings with the same controlled demeanor that once earned him respect within the NF. But despite the defense's efforts, the sheer volume of evidence presented by the government proved overwhelming. The prosecution's case unfolded like a detailed map of decisions, orders, and consequences, each point connected by documents, testimony, and intercepted communications. When the jury began its deliberations, they carried with them years of investigative work, condensed into weeks of testimony. The verdict was decisive. Luna was found guilty of racketeering conspiracy, the central charge that tied him to the criminal enterprise of the Nuestra Familia. More importantly, the jury agreed with the prosecution's special findings, affirming that Luna had been involved in 4 murder conspiracies and 1 attempted murder. Those findings transformed the case from a standard racketeering conviction into one carrying severe sentencing implications. It was a public affirmation of the government's narrative. Luna was not merely part of the NF. He was part of its strategic leadership. Sentencing in June 2025 was a somber and defining moment. The courtroom was filled with an atmosphere of finality as prosecutors recounted the years-long investigation and the violent acts tied to the council's decisions. They emphasized Luna's influence, arguing that he held the power to shape life-and-death outcomes within the gang. To them, his leadership position justified a harsh sentence, not simply as punishment, but as a message to the organization that its era of unchallenged authority was ending. The judge agreed. Luna was sentenced to 175 months in federal prison, just over 14 and a half years. It was a significant penalty, reflecting both the seriousness of the crimes and the leadership role Luna played. For the NF, the sentencing represented a major blow. For Luna, it marked the collapse of the world he had spent years navigating, manipulating, and commanding. Yet even in the moment of sentencing, Luna remained controlled. There were no outbursts, no visible signs of defeat. But beneath the stoic expression, the message was unmistakable. The power he once wielded was gone, stripped by federal agents, prosecutors, and the justice system he once believed he could outmaneuver.